Welcome to the Call to Flourish podcast. My name is Thomas Cronquist. I'm your guest host with Father Charles Sikorsky, the president of Divine Mercy University. Father, how are you doing today?
I'm just fine, Tom. How are you?
Very good, very good. Well, we have another interesting program today. We're going to continue talking with Dr. Kathie Erwin of the MS counseling program here at Divine Mercy University. Today, we're going to discuss multi-generational families. Dr. Erwin, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Very good. Thank you.
Tell us about multi-generational families. What does that mean?
Well, in many cultures around the world, that's just the way people have lived for generations. But in America, we've gotten away from that over the years, where older adults live on their own or they live in communities. When they get less capable of taking care of themselves, they may go to an older adult community. Whereas in years past, generations past actually, everybody moved together. Think for a minute about the old classic TV show, The Waltons. You can still see it on classic TV. This was a family in the mountains of West Virginia, I believe, during the Depression. And the grandparents lived with them, but they also helped in the household. The children were there. It was a multi-generational family that functioned generally quite well. And there was great respect shown to the older adults. Well, we haven't done it that well recently. And what we have happening, and even more so since the pandemic, is sometimes it's the younger adults with their young children, or a single younger adult moving back in with mom and dad for economic reasons, loss of job, or it's bringing the older family members. I have worked with families that have 5 generations under one roof. And so that changes the dynamic. So when we look at what we call a diagram of the family, a genogram, what's at the top now of the multi-generational family is what I call the de facto mom and dad. And that's often, it was the baby boomer couple or person. Now, a lot of times it's the Gen Xer. And this is the one who functions as the parent to everybody. Parent to her parents, his parents, parent to the children, parent to the grandchildren. And because we're Americans and we like our space and we want it our way, you know, the old Burger King commercial, have it your way, we all want that. When other generations move in, it definitely changes the family system, sometimes for the better, too often not for the better. And it's definitely a strain on the marriage of what I call the functional mom and dad.
Yeah, how common is this these days, and how fast has this been accelerating? You mentioned the pandemic and other causes for that.
Multi-generational family living has increased even pre-pandemic, and a lot of times economic reasons. You probably heard the term boomerang adult. Well, that is a young adult who goes out sometimes after high school, after college, maybe has a failed relationship, maybe loses a good job. There's economic reasons, and moves back in with mom and dad. So we have the child, who is no longer a child, by the way, moving back in, and it's an incredible change of dynamics between the parents and the older adult, or the younger adult rather. And then if the younger adult moves back in with children, while of course grandparents are thrilled to have the grandchildren there, but then comes the family conflict of who's parenting these kids, who's making the decisions, who's in charge. And that creates a conflict between parent and adult child. Oh, I usually hear about this. I started recognizing this a number of years ago when I would hear from the couple, who I call the de facto parents, who would be struggling in their own relationship because, you know, well, your older mother moved in with us and now we don't have any time together, or the kids moved back together back here and all we do is take care of the kids. It's interesting how that started to surface in my attention, and I started recognizing these needs of multi-generational families.
One thing it would require is a larger house. Oftentimes people are living in the house they can afford, and maybe it's not a large house. Multi-generational families would require more living space. So that's just one economic consideration. But so do you see that the trend is moving more toward this now? Our culture moving back toward this? Is this a trend? Would you call this a trend?
I watch this in demographic sites. It definitely is an economic issue. And then, of course, the pandemic situation pushed that even further. But it was starting before that. And, you know, it's very expensive for young people instead moving out, trying to get a home of their own. There's really a lot of consumer debt. There are people who move out and then have failed relationships, and they come back to the family home. But when you have a young adult or even an older adult move into your home, what happens is nobody talks about it. This is going to be fine. We're all going to be good together. But we don't discuss things like space and privacy. And, one of the world's great dilemmas, if you have 3 generations of women in a kitchen, I don't know if it's the same for 3 generations of men out in the tool shed, but 3 generations of women in a kitchen has always been an issue, at least in our culture. So it's just when people move back together and nobody talks about how are we going to do this? Who has space? Who has purpose? Who has charge over things? And they just think it's all going to magically work. And it doesn't just magically work. It ends up straining relationships.
It sounds like this is something where you could have a lot of elephants in the room.
A lot of them. They run into each other.
Yeah. And, you think in a family kind of, well, I don't want to be, how do you, this can happen in any organization or group of people, where there's this fear of bringing up something that everybody knows is an issue. And yet it just kind of sits there and simmers and gets, what would you say are some good ways to combat that, to have better communication of, hey, I love you. We want to help you as much as you can. However, have you seen because some people are just less conflict or more conflict averse than others. I guess they just don't want to bring things up.
It's a matter of talking about it as it happens and before it happens. Sometimes it's an emergency situation. A parent is ill, needs your help. Sometimes your young adult needs to move back. One of my twins, I am blessed mother of twins. One of my twins moved back home with us. And I said, okay, let's talk about how this is going to work. First of all, I'm not mommy anymore. You're an adult and I'm not going to hunt you down. Here's the thing. I'm going to ask you if you're going to be home for dinner. I'm going to ask your help with things, but basically you're an adult. And the funny part is it's not me that hunts Kelly. It's her twin, Robin. Robin would call and go, so where is Kelly? I don't know. When is she coming home? I don't know. Why don't you know? Because I'm not in charge of her anymore. Just like I'm not in charge of you. But a lot of parents, when the older adult child moves in, they think they're going to be mama again, and they're going to control a certain number of things. And that's where the conflict starts. Nobody talks about that elephant, Father Charles. And that thing just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and it erupts into a conflict. So I tell parents that if you have an older adult child moving back, let's talk about this. And no, you don't really need to control them like you did. I mean, my daughters will tell you I was extremely controlling until they turned 18. And then I said, you're grown-ups. Mama's not going to control anymore. And I don't. And it makes for a very happy arrangement. I heard my daughter Kelly say to a friend recently, said, have you ever thought about moving out? She goes, why? My mother's a perfect roommate.
So does this situation sometimes turn into something that needs therapy and counseling? Or do you have experience?
Oh yes, it does. And it's a strain on the relationship. It's a strain on usually again the couple, the parents. They start to get into a battle. One parent will be, well, this is, leave the kid alone. She's fine, or do this, or let's don't do that. And then they start to have issues. That's how I really discovered the multi-generational family dynamic, was working with couples and finding out some of these issues where, well, since your mother moved in with us, since our children moved back, since we started taking care of the grandchildren. And I found out there was no discussion about how this was going to work. There were no boundaries. Because some adult children will move back with their children, and it's like, oh, hey, grandma's here. She can take care of everything. Grandpa can take them to school. I can just go be a kid again. No, that's the wrong answer. So it's a matter of negotiating. We're going to live in the same house. And you mentioned size of house. Whose house we live in, especially when older adults move in, is a battleground issue. Because grandma may want you to move into her house, but it may not be as roomy. There may be stairs if grandma wants to move in your house. So a lot of homes, even home builders now, are more commonly building houses with 2 master suites on the ground floor with the anticipation that there may be an older adult moving in, and which the stairs would be an issue. So that's actually showing up a lot in home builders. It's a response to the trend.
You mentioned earlier that this is kind of an American problem, and we don't seem to do a good job because other cultures it's more common. I guess people have adjusted to it, and maybe because of our freedom and economic opportunity in this country, we've had a lot less of it, or have had historically. What are some of the things we might learn from other cultures to help us handle this in a better way?
Well, I think a lot of it starts, Father, with respect for older adults, and realizing that there is a certain responsibility. Those people who cared for us in our dependency may someday be dependent and need us. So it's not and there's a cultural context issue, individualistic cultures versus collectivistic cultures. I tell this to my students all the time. Collectivistic cultures tend to presume it is an expectation. In fact, it's even considered an honor to care for the older adults as well as the younger in your family. Individualistic cultures are more on their own. You don't live 2 blocks away from your parents anymore. You may live 5 states away from your parents. So we don't look at it quite the same way. And yet, as people live longer, that's a blessing. Long life is a blessing. Then their dependency years are likely to be greater. In earlier generations where living to 60 or 65 was kind of a big deal, if you made it to 70, wow, that was great. Not that many people lived in older ages. Now, living well into the 80s is far more common. And the fastest growing demographic group in America is over 85. That surprises most people.
What are some of the criteria that would you can use to determine if a situation like this isn't working, where, if you're not, certainly you have to be talking about it, and communication would be very helpful, but are there certain criteria or certain signals, signs that this multi-generational formula is not working and you need to look for something else?
There is tremendous stress in the household. People are not getting along. They're not talking to each other. And one of the first ones I see, again, is if there's a couple who I consider the parent of everybody, it's straining their marriage. And that's kind of the first time maybe they have sought counseling, not necessarily for multi-generational family living, but it's straining their relationship. And it's like, well, since your mother moved in, or your dad has all these needs, or you've always catered to the kids. Those are the things I hear. And so I've got to first of all try to keep that relationship, because if that relationship breaks, that's right now the backbone of the whole family. And so what do? They either yell at each other or they all stop talking. And I found an interesting way to change that.
What's that?
Well, it's part of what I call the PDL approach to counseling, pure dumb luck. I had tried everything I could think of and all of my, bag of tricks, and nothing was working. So I said to a family, I talked to them about journaling, and nobody wanted to journal. I said, okay, here's what we're going to do. They're all in my office. I'm going to put a notebook down on the kitchen counter where everybody goes every day. And I said, Mom, you're going to start it. Every day, a different person starts it. You have to write one positive sentence. I don't care what it is. It can be the weather's nice. It can be tomorrow's a holiday. One positive sentence. It does not accuse anyone. Everybody in the family, kids and everybody, you read it and you add a positive response, or you ask a question. Nobody speaks. Everybody writes every single day. Bring me the journal. And they're like, I don't want to do that. And I said, everybody does it, So the first week was a little strained. Actually, it was the teenager and the grandparent who were the most resistant to that, interestingly enough. But okay, we did it. By the second week, they said, can we ask a question in the journal? Oh, yeah, if it's positive. So they asked a question. By the third week, the journal got longer and longer. By the fourth week, one of the teenagers said, can we just talk? What an idea. Yes, you can just talk. How about you do it over dinner? Keep it positive, just like the journal. Yeah, can we just talk? We're tired of writing. Can we just talk? Yeah, I think I could let you do that. And they started talking. And they found out that they could talk and talk pleasantly. And that was one of those things. That's what I call my help God therapy, Father. When I'm sitting with a client and I've tried everything I can do and I put on my therapeutic smile and my little voice in my head goes, help, Lord, I got no idea. I need something. And, he gives it to me.
Help God therapy. Yeah. Hey, let's help God. Right. But, positivity, right. Is that so it's sort of like contagious, I guess.
Well, when families are disputing, everybody points to the thing they don't like about each other and the thing that frustrates them about each other. And they become so focused on that, same in relationships, that they don't see the other side. So I just push them sometimes to see the other side. And I'm not negating that there are problems by any means. But if all you're going to do is point out the negative, you are never, ever going to get to relationship.
From what you're saying, negotiating boundaries was one of the things that has to happen here. Some people love to negotiate. A lot of people are intimidated by the word.
Yeah.
What are some of the things you should try to avoid or pitfalls in doing that so that it doesn't become one-sided in some way? Because that way it may not really help solve the problem. But any suggestions for how to do that well?
I think families have to talk about what each person, what do I need within the family? What do I need? And maybe for one person, it's I need some quiet time because I'm going to graduate school and I have to study. And so if I could put a sign on my door saying I'm studying, could everybody respect that for an hour? Or maybe it's one of the parents saying, hey, we need help with other things around the house too. It's what do people need? Or maybe grandma or grandpa needs a little extra time to do things. How can we be patient? If we look at what people need and then figure out how can we participate in that need? Because everybody in the family has a different need. Some people want quiet, some people want to chat. How can we accommodate something of importance to each person? Because when we do that, what we're really doing is we're honoring that person. And some, especially a lot of cultures who are very collectivistic are particularly good at showing honor to their older adults. I don't think that's a word we use very often, not often enough with our older adults, is showing that we honor them.
Seems like part of this is making this multi-generational family structure work is developing new habits, writing down something in a journal every day, and then week after week, it looks like a new habit was developing, a habit of communication, and it bloomed into something very beneficial. Maybe are there other habits that have to be developed, specific habits that have to be developed to make this work?
I have suggested to families, let's find something that everybody can do that is that you all feel is valuable. So, for example, if it's possible, and again, physical limitations, is there something you all could volunteer on, maybe on once or twice a month together? Could you go down and help your church's food pantry? Could you do something, within the community? People who work together start to join together. So it needs to be an activity that everyone can physically or emotionally or mentally do. But what could we all do together that helps outside of the household? So we kind of take ourselves out as a group. And that will vary by family and by interest.
You mentioned honor of older people. And it seems like it's a real challenge in some ways today. I was reading about this, and it was one of the new, I can't remember which generation group that they divided these people into, but because I'm now 57, so I'm starting to think about this more, realizing, hey, I just don't click with some of these younger people right away, right? And I found out that at least one article said that one of the younger generation, they didn't want to be lectured to or told what to do, but at the same time, they wanted mentors. They wanted. So it wasn't that they were closed, or they didn't appreciate the experience and wisdom of older people, but it's kind of like the delivery. And I don't know if that, because it would seem like it's a universal thing that we should certainly be grateful for what our elders have done, but also appreciate the experience and the wisdom that they can give us. But there's got to be like a mutual what are good ways to foster that?
That's an excellent point. Mentoring has, of course, taken hold in the business community, looking for someone, who has, like, proverbially has the job you want and to be a mentor. But there are opportunities for older adults to be mentors within their family or even within the community. Some of the volunteers, when my daughters were in our church's teen group, that were the most effective and the biggest blessing were older adults who volunteered with the middle school and high school group. Now, I wouldn't want to volunteer with the middle school and high school group. I was grateful somebody else was doing it. But they just had a way with teenagers. And I was so thankful. I said to our director of middle school and high school, thanks for including them. Because sometimes in church-based groups and other groups, no one wants to invite the grandparent types. And yet, what a blessing. They would listen. Teenagers will listen to the grandparents and the older adults at times when they don't listen to their own parents or that generation. So it's a wealth. And, we have to find somebody who has a heart for that, of course. But we're not taking the maximum advantage of the wisdom that's all around us, either in our churches or our schools. Some schools have programs. I know they do in my area where I live in Florida, where older adult volunteers come in and read to children during some lunch break times. And sometimes a few of these schools I know are in a little bit, more disadvantaged areas. So maybe there's not as many people around to read or to do activities with children. That's such a blessing. And there's even a foster grandparents program. And isn't it interesting? Why are these all in the secular world? Where's our church? Why are we not doing this more?
Seems to me one thing that could be very helpful is for the more elderly members of this multi-generational family, these multi-generational families, is to relate interesting experiences they've had in their lives. You mentioned this before, I think maybe in an earlier podcast about people not wanting to hear the same story over and over, but some of the stories the elderly might have could be very, very interesting. They lived through a war. Or years ago it was, I lived through the Depression, stories of experiences that the younger generation might not ever have, and if elderly people would understand, people love stories, relate some of the things to young people that they might never experience in their life. And maybe that would, engage them and make them honor or value them in this family structure.
Yes, older adults have lived through a lot of life and have encountered similar experiences, maybe not exactly the same. So sometimes when I do older adult groups, one of the easy conversation starters is, tell me about your first car. Tell me about the first trip that you took. What was the best experience you had when you were in high school or in school? Sometimes I say school in general. Now, in today's older adults, 60s and 70s, more likely have been at least through high school, where some of my much older clients I've worked with in their 80s and 90s may have had to quit school in the 8th grade to go to work. So high school is not something they know, but something about school. What is a book you love? What is a story you love? And a lot of times those will also come from their cultural backgrounds, a special cultural story. And one of the things older adults, they don't do it anymore. We've kind of changed with our older adults, but I love my oldest because the things they say were actually a transmission of cultural imperatives. Like the phrase, don't air your dirty laundry in public. That was a cultural imperative not to go out and gossip about your family. There were a stitch in time saves 9. That was a cultural imperative that said, get things done. So some of these phrases, I've collected them over the years for my clients. These phrases that older adults will say, especially the 80s and 90s crowd, were a way I think the culture transmitted its values. And they weren't just odd things older people say. There really is a value transmission in those.
So do you think that most older people actually would love people to ask them those questions? Sounds like, when you about anything, right? Well, tell me what got you so interested in this, that, or other thing. What's been, what do you think is the best decision you ever made in your life? And get them to talk about this. I don't know. Just it seems like there'd be a lot of receptivity to that, or am I wrong?
Oh, absolutely. Because it's a matter, again, when we speak with people and we ask them for information, for their advice, for their suggestions, for their life value, we show value to them. I've heard some of the most amazing stories from older adults that I've worked with, their background, what they've experienced, how they've overcome difficulties, faith stories that are just stunning and wonderful, that showed how God has showed up in their life at times when there was an imperative. It's so empowering to me to hear those. I go, wow, you know what? So many people have overcome so much. And when they tell you their faith story, I feel like it emboldens my faith. And you probably heard those things from older adults. Sometimes it's advice givers. And sometimes the advice is, maybe it doesn't apply, but my thing is, well, that's a really great idea. Let me think about how I could potentially use that, rather than, well, we don't do it that way anymore. Okay, maybe we don't, but let me think about it.
I keep thinking about my uncle. He was a great storyteller. He'd always have people around the dinner table captivated, laughing, or scolding him for telling stories that wherever they went. But everyone listened to my Uncle Bob telling stories because he had so many of them. He had a fantastic memory, and he could relate current news to a story from the past, and it was very interesting, how they related. And so storytelling, I think, is a great way to start a communication. And can teach lessons in spite of people's reluctance, maybe to want to be taught a lesson.
Again, I think you'd mentioned this about special occasions. That's something that multi-generational families can do, or families when they gather with an older adult is, we're celebrating Thanksgiving, or we're celebrating Christmas or Easter, or what was the most memorable or the most special Easter celebration your family did, or Christmas, or birthday, or how did your birthday celebration start when you were a little girl, or a little boy? Those kinds of things that just relate to something that everybody can relate to themselves is birthdays or holidays. And I have done a modality in my group techniques book about spiritual memories. And we talk about your spiritual legacy and what were the spiritual symbols that were important. Now, those may vary depending on person's faith tradition, but everybody has them. And what are they and why are they important? And then one of the favorites that I had one elder care home almost have a fit when I did this, and it turned out wonderful. And I've done it many times. I call it Postcards from Eternity. And this is after I've gotten to know a group really well. And I'll give them a large, not really a postcard, and say, okay, let's talk about eternity. However you believe it's going to be, whatever your faith tradition is. And on the front, I want you to address it to somebody. Put somebody in mind that you'd like to communicate this. And on the back side, those old vacation postcards that say, hey, I'm having a great time in Florida. Wish you were here. Well, it's one of those. Think about, if you are where you believe in your faith tradition, you will be in eternity. What message would you send back? Put it on a postcard. And at first, one director said, oh, that's going to be depressing. I said, no, it's not, because everyone in this age group is thinking about that. They're either thinking, what is next, based on their faith tradition, or if they have no faith tradition, they're really thinking about what's next, or is there a next? And this ended up being very meaningful to all my groups that I've done this with, because everyone wants to communicate something to someone. And maybe they just have felt intimidated or ignored or not given the opportunity. And we need to give older adults the opportunity to talk about what's next and why do they have the hope that's in them and why is it important, as opposed to, oh my gosh, they're getting close to dying. Let's don't talk about that. And as one older adult said to me, do they think we don't know that?
Dr. Erwin, we have just a few minutes here left. And I was wondering, are there any particular resources that could be helpful to people who want to learn more about this book's articles that you can recommend?
Well, I think if the family's dealing with dementia, definitely go to the Alzheimer's Association website. They have a lot of books, and not just books for you as caregivers, but what I love is they have a complete list of books talking about what dementia and Alzheimer's is like, written in the perspective of small children, medium grade children, high school, and upper. Consult with someone, who has a counseling background and an understanding of families with older adults. It is a little bit different than how we deal with certain other ages, but frankly, I find it easier than teenagers. Teenagers are different too. So don't just look at it like, oh, I've got this older person and nobody knows what to do with them. Well, the first of all is you value them and you love them, and you realize that God loves them too, exactly as they are. It's not the same as they were 20 years ago, but that doesn't mean they lack value. And that's the greatest gift you can give to any older adult, is to demonstrate that you value them.
I know I've asked you this before. Do you have a website? I'm sorry, an email address that people can send you messages or questions?
Yes.
Maybe you have a website. Can ask you questions. Could you give that to us again?
Yes, please. I would love to hear from any of our listeners. It's Kerwin, my name, Kerwin at divinemercy.edu. And I would be absolutely delighted to provide any information or resources for you. Let's not give up on our older adults, because by God's grace, that'll be you someday.
Well, Dr. Erwin, thank you so much for this very interesting topic, this very interesting discussion. Father Charles, thank you. We look forward to talking with you soon. I don't know if you have any last things you'd like to share, but we've really run out of time.
Just thank you very much. And, I'm sure that this is just going to add to what's already an amazing series in our Flourish podcast.
Have a wonderful day, Doctor and Father. Look forward to talking with you all again soon.
Thank you.